The Hueys touched down exactly on time, 40 hours. No delay, no deviation. I stepped off last, scanning the perimeter as the rotor wash kicked red dust and dead leaves into the air. Fuel fumes mixed with sweat and rotting vegetation, a smell so familiar it usually meant routine. That was the problem. The landing zone was too perfect. No freshly broken branches, no signs of hurried movement, no indication anyone had pulled out recently. An inexperienced ambush force opens fire the moment the helicopters leave. They didn't. 3 minutes passed, then 5. No shots. That's when it clicked. They weren't planning to hit us in the landing zone. They were waiting for us to stretch out, to let the formation lengthen, to separate command from fire support. I gave silent hand signals. First platoon forward, 5-meter spacing. Second platoon holding distance, covering the flanks. M60 teams concealed, not forward deployed. The enemy's intent was clear to me now. Give us just enough confidence to walk ourselves into the trap. The jungle is never truly silent. When it goes quiet, it means something has taken control of it. Around 6:53, the birds stopped calling. The breeze died completely. This wasn't instinct. This was experience. I'd felt this silence before, right before formations were locked from both ends. A professional ambush doesn't start with bullets. It starts with terrain control. The trail we were on was too convenient. No thick roots, no swampy patches, no blind turns. It wasn't a natural path. It was a guided one. I raised my fist. The entire company froze mid-step, exactly as trained. For a brief moment, we took control back. At 0702, the realization hit hard enough to make my stomach drop. The landing zone was never the objective. It was the hook. We had followed every procedure correctly, and because of that, we were exactly where they wanted us. If the ambush came, and I was certain it wouldn't come from the front. It would come from everywhere at once. March 22nd, 1968, approximately 0724 hours. The rotors had barely faded when the jungle began to speak in a different language. At first, it wasn't gunfire. That was what unsettled me most. After 2 tours, I had learned that real danger rarely announced itself loudly. The landing zone sat in a shallow depression at the edge of triple canopy jungle, roughly 6 kilometers west of the district road. On paper, it was classified as low resistance. On the ground, it felt wrong the moment my boots sank into the churned mud left by the helicopters. We had put down fast, too fast for comfort. 118 men spread across 3 platoons with weapons already off safe and eyes searching tree lines that looked identical in every direction. The plan had been simple. Insert, establish a perimeter, then push north along a narrow trail reported by aerial recon. Standard air assault doctrine. Clean, efficient. But doctrine assumes the enemy reacts after you arrive. Here, the enemy had been waiting. By 0726, my radio handset crackled with the first report. Second platoon, right flank, movement detected. No visual contact, no muzzle flashes, just the sound of vegetation shifting where it shouldn't. I scanned the tree line through naked eye alone, no scopes, no technology to lean on. Just instinct and experience. I ordered the company to hold, not freeze. Hold. There's a difference. Men stayed low, knees bent, rifles angled outward. The M60 teams adjusted their sectors without a word. That told me everything I needed to know. My soldiers felt it too. The air had weight now, pressing down on us, squeezing the LZs smaller by the second. What concerned me wasn't where the contact was reported, it was where it wasn't. If the enemy had intended an immediate assault, we'd already be taking fire. Instead, we were being observed, measured. That meant coordination, discipline. Likely a company-sized force, at minimum, maybe more, positioned just beyond visual range. Close enough to strike, far enough to stay invisible. I did the math quickly. We were most vulnerable in the first 10 minutes after insertion. Formation still loose. Men oriented outward but not yet anchored. If I were planning an ambush, this is exactly when I'd trigger it. Not with noise, but with uncertainty. At 0729, 1st Platoon reported similar movement on the left. Again, no contact, 2 flanks. That confirmed it. We were being shaped. I pulled the platoon leaders in close, voices low. I didn't need to explain much. They had the same conclusion written on their faces. This wasn't harassment, it was containment. The enemy was probing our reactions, watching how we shifted, how quickly we reinforced, how we handled dead ground. That told me something else, something dangerous. They knew American tactics. I ordered the perimeter tightened, not expanded. That went against instinct. Many commanders would push outward, try to seize initiative, but pushing blind into jungle favored the ambusher, not us. Instead, I repositioned the M60s to cover likely approach corridors and ordered the 60mm mortar team to prep but not fire. Artillery support was on standby, coordinates already marked, but I held it back. Firepower is only effective when you know where to apply it. Right now, the jungle was lying to us. Minutes passed. Long ones. At 7:34, a single branch snapped to our rear. Not loud, just enough. My spine stiffened. That was deliberate, a reminder. The enemy wasn't just in front of us. They were around us, possibly behind us. That meant the landing zone itself was compromised. I imagined the map in my head. Narrow trails, natural choke points, likely pre-registered kill zones. If they had allowed us to land unopposed, it meant they wanted us exactly where we were. That realization changed everything. This was no longer a search and destroy mission. It was a test of nerve, of patience, of command control. I passed the word quietly. No pursuit, no firing unless fired upon, spacing tightened to 5 meters. I watched my men execute without question. Faces tense but steady. No panic. That discipline was the only thing keeping us alive. The jungle remained silent, too silent. And in that silence, I understood the truth we had missed in the planning tents back at base. The ambush had already begun. We were standing inside it. The enemy simply hadn't closed their fist yet. March 22nd, 1968, approximately 7:41 hours. By the time I checked my watch again, nearly 20 minutes had passed since insertion. 20 minutes without a single shot fired. That alone told me we were no longer dictating the tempo. The company was set now. Perimeter tightened, sectors overlapping, machine guns covering natural lanes through the jungle. On paper, we looked solid. In reality, we were sitting on ground the enemy had chosen long before our helicopters ever lifted off. The jungle ahead wasn't random. I started seeing patterns, slight depressions in the earth where water pooled unnaturally, narrow trails that looked used but not recently, bends in the terrain that forced movement into predictable lines. These weren't accidents of nature. They were decisions, made patiently, over time. At 7:43, 3rd Platoon reported faint voices, too far to identify language, too controlled to be accidental. They weren't shouting. They weren't rushing. That ruled out a hasty reaction to our landing. Whoever was out there had rehearsed this ground, likely dozens of times. I imagined how they saw us. A freshly landed American company, still mentally tied to the insertion phase, clustered near an LZ with limited maneuver space. Heavy firepower? Yes, but only effective if properly oriented. And orientation takes time. Time we weren't being given. I ordered a slow, deliberate pivot of the formation. No advance, no withdrawal. Just a shift in facing. It was a gamble. If the enemy intended to spring the ambush once we moved, then even this adjustment could trigger it. But staying static meant surrendering initiative entirely. As squads shifted, I watched for reaction. That's when I noticed it. The jungle reacted before we finished moving. Not visually, audibly. The sounds changed. Subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who had lived long enough in places like this. Insects went quiet in one sector. Birds lifted suddenly in another. Those weren't coincidences. Those were signals, either intentional or instinctive, caused by movement just beyond our sight. They were repositioning in response to us. That confirmed command and control on the other side. This wasn't a loose guerrilla element taking opportunistic shots. This was a coordinated force, likely at least battalion strength spread thin but positioned to channel us. Their objective wasn't annihilation. Not yet. It was containment, exhaustion, confusion. At 7:47, my radio operator whispered that higher headquarters was standing by for contact report. I didn't send one. Not yet. Reporting possible enemy presence would change nothing. Reporting ambush imminent without contact would invite pressure to act prematurely. Instead, I focused inward. I watched my platoon leaders. Their eyes kept flicking back to me, not out of fear, but expectation. They knew what this moment was. The moment where indecision fills faster than bullets. I kept my posture calm, movements measured. Command presence matters most when nothing seems to be happening. I quietly repositioned the mortar team, not to fire, but to mark dead ground and potential drop angles. I wanted options ready before I needed them. Artillery coordinates were refined again, overlapping likely approach routes. Still, I held fire. Calling in steel without clear targets would only tell the enemy exactly how nervous we were. At 0752, we received the clearest signal yet. A single round cracked overhead, not aimed, not sustained, just one. It snapped through the canopy and disappeared behind us, a ranging shot. That was the moment the entire company understood the same truth at once. This was no longer about if contact would occur, but how and where. The enemy had just confirmed range, reaction time, and discipline. They had tested us and learned we wouldn't panic. Good. But that also meant the next phase would be deliberate. I passed the word softly down the line. Prepare for contact from multiple directions. Priority sectors unchanged. Fire control strict. No one argued. No one rushed. The men checked weapons, adjusted grips, settled into positions that felt suddenly permanent. We were no longer visitors in the jungle. We were pieces on a board someone else had designed. And somewhere out there, unseen and unhurried, the enemy was deciding when to close the distance and when to let gravity, terrain, and patience do the killing for them. When the jungle closed in March 22nd, 1968, approximately 8:03 hours, the first sustained contact didn't come like an explosion, came like a tightening fist. At 8:03, fire erupted almost simultaneously from two directions, front left and rear right. Controlled, disciplined bursts. Not wild, not rushed. Whoever was pulling the trigger knew exactly where we were supposed to be standing. The spacing we had tightened earlier paid off. No single burst caught more than one man. Still, the message was clear. The enemy had committed. I dropped to one knee and keyed the radio, not to higher headquarters, but to the platoon leaders. Short commands, no unnecessary words. This wasn't the time for speeches. It was the time for clarity. Return fire was authorized, but only by sector. No sweeping, no chasing shadows. Every round had to serve a purpose. The worst mistake here would be to let noise replace thinking. What struck me immediately was the pattern. The enemy fire wasn't trying to break us. It was shaping us. Every time a squad leaned too hard into one direction, pressure appeared somewhere else. We were being nudged, guided, like cattle toward a gate we couldn't yet see. I recognized the tactic. Classic L-shaped ambush principles, adapted for depth. The jungle allowed them to layer pressure without exposing themselves. They weren't massing. They were maneuvering invisibly, using terrain instead of numbers. At 0807, I committed the M60s. Not forward, but slightly oblique to cut off likely maneuver routes. The gunners worked calmly, bursts short and deliberate. Their presence alone changed the sound of the fight. Enemy fire shifted again, pulling back just enough to avoid sustained engagement. That told me something important. They didn't want a decisive firefight. They wanted time. I requested artillery readiness, but held the call. Calling fire blindly into jungle would collapse our own maneuver options and likely achieve little. Instead, I ordered smoke, selective, controlled, placed not to conceal us, but to break their observation. It was a gamble. Smoke can blind both sides, but right now they were the ones seeing more. As smoke drifted low through the trees, the tempo shifted. Enemy fire became less precise, more probing. That was our window. I ordered a limited movement, no more than 30 meters, toward slightly higher ground to our north. Not a retreat, not an advance, a refusal to stay where they expected us to die. The movement was slow, painful, measured in heartbeats rather than meters. Squads leapfrogged, one moved while another held. Every step was earned. I stayed where I could see as much of the formation as possible, forcing myself to remain visible. Command doesn't hide when men are testing their courage. At 0815, we took our heaviest pressure yet. Fire intensified briefly, sharper, angrier. That told me we were close to something the enemy wanted to protect or avoid. Likely a primary kill zone we were slipping out of. Good. I committed the mortar team, not to destroy, but to disrupt. Short, shallow arcs. Suppression, not devastation. The effect was immediate. Enemy fire faltered and then shifted again, buying us minutes that felt like hours. By 0821, we had moved enough to change the geometry of the fight. The ambush no longer fit cleanly. The jungle still belonged to the enemy, but the trap they had prepared no longer aligned with our position. That was the turning point. Not victory, not safety, just survival. I knew then that the fight wasn't over. It was transforming. The enemy would disengage, reposition, test us again. That was their strength. But we had proven something equally important. We could read the trap while standing inside it. As the firing slackened and the jungle settled into a tense quiet once more, I allowed myself a single thought before pushing it away. We had just passed the moment where most units break, and whatever came next, it would not be on the enemy's terms alone anymore. March 22nd, 1968, approximately 08:32 to 09:10 hours. By 08:32, the firing had tapered off into something worse than noise, silence with intent. Anyone who's fought Jungle terrain learns quickly that silence isn't relief. It's assessment. It's the enemy was recalculating, just as we were. The difference was that they could melt into the terrain. We had to move through it. I took stock of the company. We were intact. Shaken, yes, but functioning. Ammunition levels were still acceptable. No one had broken formation under pressure. That mattered more than any body count. Morale isn't about confidence, it's about trust, and my men still trusted the commands coming down the line. I knew we couldn't stay where we were. The longer we remained static, the more time we gave the enemy to rebuild the trap somewhere else. Jungle ambushes don't end with a single engagement. They end when one side leaves the ground. The question was whether we would leave on our feet or be carried out later. At 08:35, I made the decision to withdraw deliberately, not back to the landing zone, but along a lateral axis the enemy hadn't anticipated. Retreat is only failure if it's reactive. This would be controlled, disciplined, and covered every step of the way. Platoons rotated roles smoothly. One held security while another moved. Then they switched. The M60 stayed central, anchoring the movement like steel pins holding fabric together. Mortar team remained ready but silent. Artillery was still on standby, but I continued to withhold it. Explosives solve problems, but they also announce intentions. I wanted uncertainty working for us, not against us. As we moved, the jungle tested us again. A burst here, a snap of sound there, never enough to fix a position. Just enough to remind us that we were not leaving unnoticed. At 08:47, a small element attempted to press our rear. Not aggressively, more like a hand on the shoulder, checking balance. I adjusted the formation slightly, tightening the tail, denying them the opening they were searching for. The pressure faded. That confirmed it. They were no longer trying to destroy us. They were measuring cost. That's when I understood the real outcome of the ambush. They hadn't failed, but neither had we. The enemy had lost surprise and timing. We had lost the illusion of control. In jungle warfare, that exchange often ends the engagement. Neither side wants to pay more than necessary. By 09:02, the ground began to open slightly. The canopy thinned just enough to let more light through. It wasn't safety, but it was space, and space is life in a place designed to suffocate movement. I called higher headquarters then, reporting contact, estimated enemy strength, and our current position. Calm voice, clean transmission, no urgency bleeding through the words. At 09:10, we reached terrain that no longer favored a prepared ambush. The jungle's grip loosened, just a little. No shots followed us out. Only then did I let myself breathe. We hadn't won a battle in the traditional sense. No flags planted, no ground held, but we had denied the enemy what they wanted most, a clean kill inside a trap they had spent weeks preparing. As we reorganized and prepared for extraction later that day, I looked at my men, mud-streaked, exhausted, alert even now. They had learned something that morning, the same lesson every infantry unit eventually learns the hard way. In Vietnam, the enemy didn't need to defeat you outright. They only needed you to stop thinking. And on March 22nd, 1968, in the jungle west of Quảng, we didn't give them that satisfaction.